very first vampire story ever written in English. It comes over 50 years before Bram Stoker's Dracula. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But when that book is published anonymously, and the word goes out all over London that it's actually been written by Byron. And so it starts to sell like crazy because Byron's written the story about a vampire. And Byron, is furious about it. Polidori's furious about it. They both write things to the press. Nobody believes them. Everyone continues to believe it's written by Byron. The publisher doesn't really do much of anything to stop people believing that it was written by Byron, because he's selling. It's selling like crazy. When they finally establish that it's been written by Polidori, actually the sales slow down. So,
do you think that's a publisher starting that rumor?
Oh yeah, I mean, so much of literary history is actually book history, and book history always includes the history of publication. And so what we're always dealing with when we talk about literature, it's really good to always remember that we're talking about booksellers. We're talking about a business where somebody has to be convinced to make this book and to try to sell it. By the 1800s, the book trade in England is a very tricky business. And you have to know that business, and you have to be connected, or nothing's going to get published. And it's better than it was, 100 years, 200 years before that, 400 years before that, when everybody was anonymous, when all the books were written by anonymous. But by now, we're into this other phase where the author of a book can make or break the book. It doesn't matter to a certain extent what's in the book, because we're entering the beginnings of the age of celebrity. We're in that place now where you might never have read Shelley, you might never have read Byron, you might never have read Keats, but you know that there is this movement going on of very, very young writers, and they're wild, and they're having affairs with their sisters, and they're having affairs with, the young daughters of famous writers. Yeah. So, this is punk rock. This is punk rock, early 1800s style, and that's who we're talking about. When I give this class to students, I always say to them, how old are you? How old are you? Okay, so 2 years before, think of how old you are right now. 2 years ago, could you have written a novel that would have lasted hundreds of years and inspired God knows how many nightmares, and and would you have, like, when you were 15 years old, could you have seen yourself running off with your boyfriend to Europe?
For better or worse.
Yeah. Well, yeah. For so Mary's a precocious, genius child. She meets Percy Shelley. They run off together. They start traveling through Europe. She's taking notes on everything, journals, diaries. Percy is too. They come back for a while. Percy's thinking about divorce. There's all kinds of different things going on. And they start to embark on yet another tour of Europe. They take Mary's stepsister, Claire Claremont, along. Claire is another precocious, willful child. She's been having an affair with Byron, and she's pregnant with Byron's child. And so part of this trip is to try to meet up with Byron somewhere in Europe and try to convince him to support the child, to support Claire's child. And so there's different reasons for the trip. They start to go through Europe sort of in one direction. Byron is going up the Rhine Valley, and you can imagine, that there are these two groups of people, and they're on tour, and they're visiting all these things, and they both pass through Germany on their way into Switzerland. And The Shelleys visit, a village called Frankenstein, and there's a castle, there's the ruins of a castle Frankenstein there. It turns out that there are actually a whole series of villages in Germany that are named Frankenstein. And there are ruins of Castle Frankensteins in different places too. It's pretty much agreed that the one that they probably visited was the one where a literary salon had been meeting inside the ruins of the castle for a while to read all kinds of different stories to each other. That's something that they probably would have heard of as they passed through. They also might have heard the story of an alchemist. So, before chemistry was a science, we had alchemists. Alchemists are legendary. They're trying to turn lead into gold. They're involved in all kinds of semi-scientific, semi-magical operations. This particular one was not just a good alchemist, he was also an excellent chemist. And he was someone who was known to the German court. So he wasn't completely without connections, he had a reputation. He had been for quite some time trying to rent Castle Frankenstein to conduct his alchemical experiments there. And this was something that was talked about in the neighborhood, was the crazy alchemist who wanted to conduct experiments at Castle Frankenstein. So you can see how there are all of these very loose, not able to prove 100% connections between the touring that Mary and Percy are on and the kinds of things that wind up in Frankenstein. They converge on a villa that Byron has rented, and the Shelleys and Claire Claremont move in there, and this villa Diodati, the villa was a place that was owned by a friend of Milton's, and Milton had actually stayed there and written there in this villa. So the villa has, an amazing literary pedigree that comes before their visit. But they're there now. And, it's a cliche now to say it was a dark and stormy night. But it actually was a dark and stormy night. This was the worst summer in European history.
This is during the Little Ice Age, right?
So there had been volcanic eruptions in Indonesia, so vast that it changed the climate of Europe. And this was the wettest, coldest summer that anyone could remember. There are scholars now who try to draw on all kinds of different things for their work, who now are saying that they believe that it's this horrible summer that actually leads to the real creation of the Romantic era. That the sort of feeling of despair and futility and everything else, the melancholy that permeates all of the Romantic era, all comes out of this terrible weather. Well, one thing's for sure, and that's that Frankenstein comes out of a night when they're all sitting around in the big main room of Villa Diodati, huge fires roaring. They're reading ghost stories to each other. From these are German ghost stories. Phantasmagoria is the title, and they're reading them to each other. And it's a great night. There's all kinds of thunder and lightning. These huge cracks of thunder, and then they see the lightning, and